Mahlir was adorned with more pomp than the high priest himself, whom he faced, his mother's brother Joazar, toward whom he advanced as he walked out into the court of Israel, as he walked through a corridor of his peers toward the 49 steps of the mighty altar of God, its flames leaping into the morning sky in a furious roar. Joazar, his uncle, Archelaus's most recent appointment, was standing at the altar's base, holding the vestments of the sacrifice, white linen to collect and purify the stains of death, which he placed upon Mahlir in return for the robes. Priests were already in place, standing near the flames, standing high on the altar, one holding the lamb, others carrying bowls in which to collect the blood to be sprinkled. Mahlir walked the 49 steps and faced the lamb and bent low and stroked gently the creature's forehead, holding the death instrument in his other hand behind his back, honed to such sharpness it could not even be touched, not even in the slightest way, without bringing blood. The chanting intensified, "Holy to the Lord." His eyes felt hypnotic. Instantly, fear in the animal changed to a simple wriggling for support beneath its feet, and with a large-eyed look of animal innocence, like a puppy dog with implicit trust in its master, an ill child looking to a parent, so did the lamb watch as the glistening blade came to cut its jugular. Its face jerked with surprise as it felt the sting. Life spilled willingly from the deep wound, gushing forth with a gurgle of breath stopped short. The mouth of the young thing opened in its last moments of life in its confusion, just a little, as if to show trust still. Even as its eyes glazed to emptiness, they communicated trust. The volume rose louder, "Holy to the Lord." The monotone of the heavy male voices seemed to vibrate the walls, the stones themselves. The ram's horn sounded again. The people had been redeemed. And the thought occurred to Mahlir, maybe he had been redeemed too. Perhaps God had accepted the lamb for him as well. Now he would go home to Rachel. Now he would go. And they could begin their new life together. There was a passageway he could take that led directly to the court of women. In its midst, the sounds of bells tinkled. A robed figure stepped out to obscure the dim torchlight. "The gold and scarlet looked good on you today, my young nephew," said Joazar. "Uncle!" Alone in the tunnel with Mahlir was the high priest, his mother's brother. Mahler's heart began to race anew, and breath became hard. The air was heavy in the temple underbelly that day anyway, straining his lungs, flickering low the wall lamps, causing the draining cisterns to echo harsher, bringing stronger the oppressive smell of the animals and their feed and manure. Joazar was there to chastise him for his lack of preparedness and his ineptness, surely. Perhaps he even knew. Joazar embraced Mahlir on both sides and kissed him, as was the custom. Feeling Mahler's rigidity, he spoke to reassure. "You did exceptionally well, my young nephew. You gave a great you did it well, did it wisely. You have a great future in the service of the Lord. Come, welcome you to the portico." Mahlir nervously followed Joazar upward. He was always uneasy around his uncle, and emerged behind him into the court of women in the sunshine. The sun, full in the sky now, was blinding. He shaded his eyes. Maybe Rachel would be there. Maybe she had come to meet him. Maybe the animals were packed and ready, waiting below with Benjamin, so that they could leave right from there. That would be just like her, always the practical one. The organized one, born under the sign of Parthenos, fastidious to a fault. What would he ever do without that woman? He was looking above the heads of the other women for the shaded head of Benjamin. Where Benjamin was, so would Rachel be, ever under his watchful eye. Mahlir was thankful that Eli had acquired Benjamin, that he would be going along with them on their journey. But of course, they were not there. On the distant hills, the temple sat on one of 7. He could see the long caravans of Passover visitors returning to their towns and countries, caterpillars, multicolored, ambling lazily over the spring green of the boulder-strewn and terraced terrain. Said Joazar, adorned in his priestly garments, the gold and blue, the purple and scarlet. "The late king's son requests your presence." The Tetrarch? The most high and revered Archelaus? To refer to Archelaus in any other way was unwise. One never knew what may reach back to him of thoughts spoken openly. "I spoke to him yesterday. He directed me to have you escorted to the palace immediately following your duties here." "An escort is not necessary. I know the way." Joazar gave a slight bow. "As you wish. But Why should he seek me? What could he possibly desire of me? The high and mighty Archelaus is not to be questioned when asking to see a priest. I only meant I was curious. I was hoping you would know. Mahler's uncle smiled reassurance through the cloaking of his long gray beard. His aged eyes opened wide. Worry not, my young nephew. You are a Zadokite. Your family is of the priestly line. It is only natural that the Tetrarch should want to develop a relationship with you. You should be wanting to do the same with him. After all, it may be you one day who will wear these robes. Of what things did he speak in requesting my presence? Well, he inquired about your duties here at the temple and asked about your knowledge of the law. He asked about your wife and gave her his best wishes in the time of her upcoming birth. And he asked about your father-in-law, the Sadducee. The spot on Mahler's forehead flared. He scratched at it furiously. My father-in-law, Eli? Why? For what purpose? I have learned some lessons in my many years walking with the Lord, said Joazar. One of the greatest of these is humility. If I must humble myself before an earthly king to do the deeds of a greater king, to do the deeds of the God of Abraham and Isaac, before whom no graven image shall be placed, then let it be so. If the Tetrarch demands my presence, I obey. If Archelaus desires that I meet him in the baths of the Zykstra, though it be a place of the training and exercise of the naked athletes, I accommodate him, as long as he keeps it free of the graven images of Caesar and of the eagle. If we allow him the little things, the things that are important to him, then perhaps he will allow us the big things, the things that are important to us, said Mahler, in remembering his encounter with the gardener. I may have already done damage. He explained his confrontations with the Tetrarch's son, how he had been short and rude to the boy. His son? The boy, the son of Archelaus. He said you set before him the duties of beautifying the court of women. His son? The boy, the son of Archelaus. I met him on the esplanade, pushing a cart of tools. Ah, yes, the boy. Joazar came close to laughter. But how did you conceive the idea that he was the son of Archelaus? He said so. He told me he was in his father's house. No, my nephew, no. His father is a carpenter and a stonemason. A carpenter? Why is the son of a carpenter here? And why is he dressed in the tassels and white robing of a priest? Joazar's smile widened. We have taken him under our care, adopted him, you might say, for a time, until his parents can be located. We gave him clothing while his own is being washed and purified. A stray child in the service of the temple, draped in the robing of a priest? He's quite a remarkable young man. He displays an understanding of the law far beyond his years. Joazar squinted against the sun, higher now in the mid-morning sky, warming the stones of the temple, whitening and softening them. He came to us at the start of Passover with the most penetrating of questions. While his parents were tending to their business, he spent his days with us, often answering his own questions with a profundity that gave us all pause. We put him to work cleaning and polishing the stonework. Being the son of a mason, he knows quite a bit about the various stones and their absorption properties, about how they need to be cleaned in order to bring out their true polished beauty. That one stone near the aqueduct, the one with where the iris is chipped, he carved a replacement block. It's better than the original, and he did it in less than an hour. Mahler did not respond. Joazar must have perceived his emotions. The boy is not a threat to you. He's not a Levite. His name is Yeshua ben Yosef. He is from the line of Judah, of the house of David, so he could never be high priest, as you someday shall be. He could never assume your position. He could never enter the holy place as you did today. Where are his parents? The family is from Nazareth, apparently. He became separated from them when Passover ended. They must have left without realizing he was not with them in their caravan. I am sure they will return for him soon. Mahler and his uncle were nearing the portico. Mahler rubbed and scratched again at his forehead. He did it absent-mindedly. Blood ran through his fingers and down his cheek. Joazar stared, part in disbelief, part in fear. Fear seized Mahler as well. He had done it without thinking. The lesion had been hidden beneath the phylactery. "Remove your hand," demanded Joazar. "It is nothing, uncle." Mahler tried to conceal his anxiety, tried to think of an explanation. "Remove your hand," shouted Joazar. "It must be examined." Mahler did as he was asked. "It is nothing. I bumped my head in the corridor. That's all." He put his hand back over it in fear that Joazar might see the scabs and the blisters. Well, uncover it until it heals, lest someone think it otherwise. Joazar was satisfied. The priesthood had pronounced him clean, the final authority in such matters. With Joazar as a witness, Mahlir purchased a wrap from a vendor setting up at the portico entrance and gave it no more thought. He could not. Any other reality was unthinkable. Joazar gave his peace and walked away into a doorway to attend to duties elsewhere, saying as parting advice, "It is not wise to keep the king waiting." Mahlir nodded and purchased a gift for Rachel from another one of the vendors. He had no intention of going to see Archelaus. By this time tomorrow, he and Rachel would be boarding a ship in Joppa. From there, they would travel to Tyre, where they would dock to replenish water and pick up more passengers. Tyre was under Syrian rule. There, they would be able to breathe a little easier. From there, it would be on to Rome. The portico was now resplendent with reams of sunshine blasting in through the windows, and it was filled with people, the buyers and the sellers and the dignitaries and the common people and those from far lands. Mahlir had much to be grateful for. He had been lauded by the high priest himself. He was tall in the eyes of men, and the blood of the Lamb had redeemed him for his sins as well. Sins past, because there was no sin anymore. From this day forward, he would begin anew, with only his wife as his lover and companion, as it should be. Although, a strange thing, as he was pushing his way through the crowd, a feeling of discontent began to grow, a bitterness undefined, an emptiness in which all was not well. Even though he had been redeemed, even though he would not be returning to Jael, still it was there, that unexplainable emptiness. The more he walked, the more it grew, magnifying, doubling, tripling itself, beginning as a tightness in his stomach, then expanding to a pounding between his ears, an actual physical noise, pounding, booming, until halfway through the portico, amid the laughter, the arguing, the bartering, the multitudes of lively discussions, at a point where the noise had grown to a storm inside his head, an answer came. In an instant, Mahlir knew what must be done. God was speaking to him. Mahlir knew from his temple studies how to listen to the voice of God, the inner voice it was called, an urging that cannot be ignored. To ignore it is to cast one's fate to chance. For his redemption, Mahlir needed to do more. So great was his sin, worsened by the fact that he was a priest, a man of God, an example before men, darkened further by the fact that he had harmed one of God's creatures using God as his alibi. He whirled around to go back to where he had come from, nearly bumping into a man doing business at the table of a money changer. The man was a dignified man and a comely gentleman of a foreign tongue, clothed in the colors of the Orient. And he had just been given 3 denarii in return for a gold Parthian double of Phraetes and Musa. He had given the money changer a coin worth 10 times the amount of the 3 he had received in return. Mahlir would have intervened at the injustice, had he not been in such a hurry, had he not been in the service of the Lord's bidding. Obsession moved his steps. Determination formed his expression. Quickly he walked. Half running, his eyes defining his purpose, he walked to the court of women, just to be sure Rachel had not come there to meet him, up its steps and into the terraced enclosure. No one was there, except the young gardener tending to the gardens of stone, for it is set down in the Mishnah that no green thing is to be grown within the holy walls. The things of God's creation, the vines and the petals of beautiful flowers, the intricacy of a leaf, the sturdiness of the stately date palm that reaches to the sky, are all carved into the stones of the temple, into the cornices and columns, into the stools, benches, and railings, and are washed and polished daily by the gardeners, priests whose duty it befalls that day, or in this case, the young son of the carpenter from Nazareth. The boy looked up. Mahlir felt the pierce of his eyes and refused to return the look. Let him annoy one of the other priests. Let him find his mentorship elsewhere. Mahlir had needs of his own. Mahlir kept on walking and caught again the scent of alabaster. Again it seemed as though the boy wanted to say something. Mahlir refused him, looked straight ahead, and walked on past, feeling all the while an urge to return, feeling strangely protective of the boy, powerfully so, like he had turned his back on his own well-being. But he had concerns of his own, and the alabaster scent began to fade. The burning on his forehead was worsening. He resisted the impulse to scratch at it again, to ease the pain of the deepening itch, and walked on. Perhaps if he didn't touch it, if he didn't think about it, it would go away. He was looking for a door to the underchambers. There were several of them. His steps were slowing because to get there, he had to pass a place he always took pains to avoid. It was a place the mere presence of which turned his stomach foul, one wherein a thing lay festering worse than the boil on his forehead. He forced himself not to think of it. He forced himself to focus on the beauty of the temple itself. The temple had been rebuilt since the fire, ever the sturdier, more appealing to the eye, if that be possible. The wood smelled of fresh pitch and cedar. The pitch on the roofs of the cloisters were covered with gold ornamentation, and the roofs themselves with clay tile, never again to be susceptible to catapulted pots of fire. A lesson learned. There was no evidence whatsoever of what had transpired 5 years earlier, of the destruction wrought by the fire and the battle, except for a black smudge on the floor beneath one single cloister, the one by the door to the underchamber, charred blood and grease that would not come clean, no matter the scrubbing, remnants of a young soldier whose essence impressioned even the surrounding air with words of ever-present malicious intent. "Why do you do this? We had an agreement." Mahlir stopped and turned. There were other doors he could take. It was not as if this was the only one to the underchamber. He even considered abandoning altogether his plans for absolution, this that the Lord was telling him to do, and saw again the eyes of the stone gardener, the boy from Nazareth. The boy had followed him, wretched child, with those pompous eyes. The boy was about to say something. Mahlir could see it on his lips, though they were yet unparted. The boldness of it. Mahlir turned away before the absurd thing could be spoken, whatever it was, and went back to his own purpose to do the bidding of the Lord, and passed through the cloister anyway with its foul spot on the floor. It would not defeat him. He procured a torch and touched it to flame, and went down again into the belly of the temple to do the Lord's bidding, to take a goat from the vaults, a goat pure and unblemished, to deposit 3 times its value into the temple treasury, and to release it into the desert to thirst and die, in the same manner that Mahlir deserved to thirst and die. This was what God had told him to do. The animal would bear his burdens, his sin, holy to the Lord, Mahlir's scapegoat. And great were his burdens, the greatest of which was what he had done to Rachel. He found it odd that he should suddenly come to think of his adultery as the worst of sins, because adultery was not even a punishable offense, unless, of course, the adultery were to be perpetrated by a woman. More than being wrong, Mahlir's adultery was made worse by the fact that he had done it using God as his alibi, and he was so very, very sorry and relieved that it was at last finished. He was finished with the affair, and he was relieved that he had escaped it without having done harm. Incredible relief. He found an ibex doe, one pure and without blemish, long-haired and white, silken smooth. Her face was soft with the tenderness of maternity, for she had only several months ago given birth. She was blessed because her children had been offered up to the Lord. She cried out as Mahlir led her through the tunnel to the gate, because she had not been milked and her udder was full. Mahlir was fearful somebody would hear, though no one came. He walked out the gate unnoticed. Access to and from the temple were unrestricted in the weeks before and after Passover, day and night. The hairy goat gate, it was called. It led toward the desert from the stables. It was the one always used for scapegoats. He walked out into the valley and up to the top of the Mount of Olives, called by some Olivet, leading the doe by a white woolen rope. The sloping length of Olivet's Peak was in itself a tiring walk. On the other side was the sudden white and yellow of the wilderness, terracing and rolling and cutting its way into oblivion. The hills of Judea, splendid with trees and all types of flowering bushes, except on the northern sides where the winds never carry the rain, come to a point eastward where there is a monstrous hole in the earth. This is the Judean wilderness. The creatures that live in its depths are of a hostile nature. The land itself is unforgiving. Many a fated wanderer has become lost while walking a simple straight line to the Dead Sea. Other than the Dead Sea, where nothing lives, where an occasional spring or oasis pops up, the only water in the wilderness is that which flows beneath the surface upon a rock water table. The roots of some of the sturdier trees reach it from dry riverbeds cut by wintertime flash flooding. For one to walk to the bottom of this gorged-out valley would take an entire day, if one could even make it at all in a day without falling to one's death. So Mahlir went part way down, and in a lifeless ravine released the doe. But she refused to stay. The beautiful creature continued, following at his heels. At one point he threw stones at her. Still she followed, bawling, pleading, because she had never known freedom. And there was the pain of not having been milked. Until being recently given to the temple, she had known only the gentle hand of a master, the protection of a herder who would give his own life for hers, who would milk her when the pain came, who would find grazing grass when she hungered, who would provide water when she thirsted. So when Mahlir tethered her with the rope around a stone, she expected he would return. She had been tethered many times, and each of those times the herder had returned. There was no reason to doubt that this time would be any different. She would watch moment to moment, patiently, in anticipation. Even at the point of her death, she would be watching, knowing he would return. Mahlir looked in his eyes before leaving, and he almost didn't do it. He almost changed his mind and took her back with him. He should have, because she suffered in vain, he soon discovered, as did the lamb at the altar. Neither did any good. Change had already begun, be it due to providence or by chance or by Mahler's own folly. Life would never be the same. When he arrived home, instead of finding Rachel, he found their front door sealed with a multiple layer of wax, still worn from its application. A plank with the inscription, "Property of the Tetrarchy," was nailed across it, carved once in Aramaic and again in Latin as notice to the Romans. Benjamin was there as well, in a helpless sitting position, dead, impaled by the shafts of 3 oversized arrows. A large mechanical crossbow of some sort had pinned him to the door, the kind carried by oxen on a war cart. He would have given his life for his mistress, and he did. Mahler's mind sat frozen, pulsing with its confusion. He called Rachel's name in screams of terror and pounded on the door and dug his fingers into the wax. The only people to hear were those outside who gathered to point and whisper, some of whom used to be his friends. He ran up to them, only to see them turn and hurry away. In his madness, he grabbed one. "What has happened here?" he pleaded. "Where is my wife?" Said the man in fear. "O priest, servant of God, the Tetrarch comes to arrest you. Now release me before I, too, am bound over for execution as one who knows you. As we speak, his army searches for you." Mahlir shook him as though the man were his enemy. "Why? In the name of Abraham, why? And where's my wife?" "She has been taken to Antonio. They say she and you are accused of seditions against Archelaus, of conspiracy with the merchant Eli for the overthrow of the government." In his blind insanity, Mahlir went there too, to the tower. What he was thinking he could do, he did not know. He merely ran mindlessly to the feared Tower of Antonia, to the woman who was soon to leave this world without ever knowing of his sin, without ever allowing him to make amends. Like Benjamin, he too would give his life for Rachel.